Today's the day where I can finally talk to you about the performance upgrade for the Bosch Performance Line CX Gen 5 motor. For free, you get more torque up to 100 Newton meters and you get more power up to 750 watts. We had the opportunity to test the upgrade beforehand, before launch, in practice, on the trail, and we also put it through our dyno testing. After the intro, I'm gonna tell you how much power you really get, how it feels, and what the trade-offs are, because unfortunately there's always trade-offs with things like that. So stay tuned, let's go. Ever since the let's be honest, slightly disappointing launch of the Bosch CX Gen 5 motor, it's been rumored that there's going to be some kind of performance upgrade via software at some point in the future. I mean, that doesn't come as a big surprise to anyone who's been following the e-bike and e-mountain bike market in recent years, because that's exactly what Bosch did with the predecessor, so with the Bosch CX Gen 4 motor, and they did the same, by the way, with the CX Gen 2 motor back in the day. That's been a while. So it's not a surprise that we get this update. It's kind of a surprise that we get it this soon. I'm pretty sure Bosch felt the breath on their necks from DJI and more recently from Specialized, who all pushed the power and torque numbers way higher and left the CX Gen 5 when it comes to power output in the dust. So yeah, you get for free more torque, more power. For free means you can do the update yourselves via your smartphone. You just need the Flow app and you can update the app and the bike yourself. You don't need to go to your dealer or anything. The update is completely free of charge and will be available in July, according to Bosch. Yeah, more power, I mentioned it in the intro, is quite substantial. It's 50 Newton meters more torque, so up to 100 Newton meters, and it's 150 watts of power more. That's a huge difference. That's something I didn't expect to see, this much more power. So it's gonna be interesting looking at the numbers in just a minute. There's one more or two more things I want to touch on before we start with that, because there's one peculiar thing with the upgrade. How much more power you get, it doesn't come down to Bosch. It comes down to the manufacturer of your bike. I'm pretty sure this is because of the gear hubs that some bikes are specified with. Because, I mean, the CX Gen 5 motor, it's mostly specified in e-mountain bikes, but there's also, trekking bikes, cargo bikes, and other kind of bikes that are spec'd with the CX Gen 5 motor, and some of them come with gear hubs in the rear. And also modern gear hubs, some of them, they have max torque limits. You can only put, 85 Newton meters, 90 Newton meters into them, or you're out of spec, and a manufacturer can't sell you a bike that's technically out of spec. So they will probably limit this for that specific models in their range. But I'm pretty sure that like 95% of the bikes out there, especially the e-mountain bikes, they will get like the full amount of power. In practice, this will mean that you make the update via the Flow app, but you won't have the more power right away. You have to kind of unlock it first. So in the Flow app, you will have the option to raise your max torque up to 100 Newton meters, and you will have the option to raise your max power to up to 750 watts. In this pre-release software and the app, we could only adjust, there was only a torque slider, but we already had like max power. It just didn't display on the slider. But when you get the bike, you will probably have two sliders there. And when you adjust that slider above the 85 Newton meters that the CX Gen 5 originally came with, there's a small note below that says, well, you raised the power above like 85 newton meters, you will have more, you will put more stress on your drivetrain, you will consume more battery. And that kind of notice, it shows to me that Bosch is still kind of committed to what they said originally with the CX Gen 5. And I said the same in my original video, that I think 85 newton meters and 600 watts of power is plenty and is good for like a lot of riders, for probably most riders. But for those who want more and who are aware of the trade-offs they will have with more power, they now have the option to push the limits of the motor and their bikes and their drivetrains. All right, now that this is out of the way, let's look at our dyno testing. And let's start right off with our max power measurements. And Bosch claims we get 150 watts of more power with the new update. And we almost saw 150 watts more than our original measurement with the CX Gen 5 motor. That means in numbers, we get 685 watts of max power with the new upgrade. That puts the motor right on top with like the most powerful units out there. It doesn't match the DJI Avinox, and the Avinox doesn't even need its boost function to be a lot more powerful. That's still king. Like if you want raw power, there's nothing quite like it. But just below that, there's already the CX Gen 5. Obviously, there are some niche motors like the Sux RS or the old TQ motor, but let's be honest, you can't really buy any bikes anymore with those motors. So, like with current motors, it's in the top 3, and it also is more powerful, not a lot, but it's more powerful than the Specialized 3.1 S-Works motor. So the top of the line Specialized motor is a little bit less powerful than the Bosch after this upgrade. However, Bosch sticks to its nature and the tuning of the CX Gen 5, and by the way also the CX Gen 4 motor. And they've always been tuned for a more sportive feeling, for dynamic riding feel. And you can clearly see that when we look at the power output at just 100 watts of input on the cranks. There's like 350 watts you get. This is fine, but it's less than most other drive units, especially in that kind of max power output range. So that means you have a progressive feeling, a dynamic feeling, but that also means you have to put power into the cranks to get the max power output of the motor. And now that we've already talked about, let's look at the curve, the power output curve, and you can clearly see what I mean. Let's look at like before and after upgrade, or let's look at 85 newton meter setting and 100 newton meter setting. And you can see that the curve is like offset a little bit on top. At each input point, you get a little bit more power back, but the ceiling of the power is way, way higher now. Like where the old motor already starts to, reduce its output power. After the upgrade, it just goes on and on and on and on. You get a lot of more power back, and you will reach max power output at around 200 watts of input. That's not huge, it's not a lot. I think pretty much everyone can put 200 watts of input on the cranks, but you will feel it. Like it's a lot more, or it's more progressive than with most other motors on the market. And you can clearly see this in compared to other drive units on the market. Specialized is similar, but you only need about 170 watts of input power to get the max power output there. And Pinion and Shimano are a lot different, where you get a lot more support, so you don't have to pedal as hard. And the odd one out, again, is the DJI Avinox, which is already like at almost max power at just 50 watts of input, which is crazy in the turbo mode, by the way, but still it's crazy. So yeah, pretty interesting. And also pretty interesting, let's look at the cadence curve. So how does like your cadence, how fast you pedal, like lighter gears or heavier gears. How does it influence the output power of the motor? And here we can see that Bosch is still Bosch. And when it comes to this, Bosch is still king, because there's just no other drive unit out there that is so consistent when it comes to cadence. Up to like a cadence of 60, the power output rises a little bit. You already get decent support at lower cadences, but right about around 60, you are reaching like top level, and then it just stays like this until like a cadence of 100. I think we did our measurement until 140 this time, and nothing changed, like maybe 5 or 10 watts. It's really, there's no difference. It just goes on. There's no change, and there's just no other drive unit out there that is so consistent when it comes to that, which is pretty impressive, because it means that it's a really intuitive riding feel, and you don't need a lot of time to adjust to the feel of the drive unit, because when you have huge differences in different cadences when it comes to power output, it means you have to get used to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. For example, like the DJI Avinox or also the Pinion MGU, they get like more powerful with higher cadences, which can be a good thing, but you have to know that, and you have to adjust to that suddenly you have maybe 50 or maybe 100 watts more power when you pedal faster, which means you might have rear wheel slip or stuff like that. On the other hand, there's other drive units, like for example the Shimano EP801, that really struggle at higher cadences, and there is like a huge drop in power. And yeah, with the Bosch it just stays like it is, and this is a really, really nice riding feel. Before we talk about the trade-offs that come with more power, obviously derating and heat, let's just very briefly, 1 or 2 sentences when it comes to power consumption. Again, we're not doing any power consumption measurements anymore, but what I can tell you when it comes to like comparing the 85 Newton meter setting and a 100 Newton meter setting, it will consume more power. It's just way more powerful. We just saw that. So you will have less range with this setting. There's no way around it. I mean, there's some pretty smart people at Bosch, but even they have to obey the laws of physics. So you will have more power consumption with the new settings, and please be aware of that. Yeah, and now let's talk about derating and thermal stability, because, well, let's face it, we have a lot more power output, and the CX Gen 5, it was okay when it came to derating and thermal stability, but it wasn't like one of the top performers anyway. And so it doesn't really come as a big surprise to see that now, after just about 8 minutes of max power output, we are already seeing some pretty hard derating, and the motor throttles, like loses power and drops to about 80% of output power. And the thing is, 8 minutes at max power output, it's not, because usually I say when something like this happens after 20 minutes, I usually try to, say it doesn't happen that much. But after 8 minutes, this is certainly something that will be relevant for a lot of you out there. So you should be aware of that. Still, there are 2 things I want to say to that, because it might not be as dramatic or as bad as it looks right now. First of all, it's interesting to see how Bosch approaches the topic of derating, because compared to, for example, the most recent Specialized 3.1 motor, where we saw something like that after about 15 minutes, we see a sharp drop-off in power to like 75%. Compare that to the way Bosch handles it, we have the drop in power is a lot more smooth. It almost fades a little bit out until you reach about like 80% of power, where it stays, and stays pretty stable, by the way. Which means in practice, when you're riding the bike, you will most likely not really notice the drop in power because it's so smooth and so gradual. Sure, the power is gone, like there's no way around it, but it doesn't feel as sudden and it might feel a little bit nicer in a way. That's the one thing that is pretty interesting. And also when we look at the comparison with the setting at 85 Newton meters, where we saw like the derating happen after about 12 or 13 minutes. There we should be aware of how we decided to visualize the derating because we adjust all drive units to their respective power output, like 100%, 80%, and so on. But when we look at like the real numbers, the power output numbers, the absolute numbers, and compare like the 85 Newton meter setting and the 100 Newton meter setting, we can see that even with 20% less power, where the motors, by the way, then stay pretty stable. We saw that when we look at our extended window measurement of 20 minutes, like there's nothing happening after like the smooth drop off to 20% to 80% of power. We are still like in a range where the old setting was at max power. So the thing is, you only lose like the power, the more power you get with the new setting, with the update. You lose that after like 8 minutes of constant max power output. Then it will drop down to what you are used to now for your max power. And then it's rock solid after that. So in a way, it got better. It looks worse in our original visualization, but the derating behavior is actually better. And I'm pretty confident that we see thermal derating because we checked with the thermal camera and the motor unit, it got really hot. It had like 77, 78 degrees like on the outside, which means it was also already pretty hot inside. And especially with a lot of electronic components, they usually, some of them get into trouble at like 100 or 105 degrees. So I'm pretty sure that we see some kind of thermal derating, but it's good. Like I said, it looks worse, but it's actually better than before. Are there other motors on the market that stay a little bit more consistent? Yeah, sure, there are. But I still feel that it's not going to be an issue for most riders out there. Still, you have to be aware of that. And now for the impressions from the trail, I'm going to hand over to future me, who's going to tell you about how the riding feels, how it changes with the new power settings. And I'm telling you, it's amazing because even though I had time to ride this bike behind me with the performance upgrade on the motor, thanks by the way to M1 for providing this bike to us beforehand to experience it, to ride it, to test it, to put it on a dyno. Thank you guys, really appreciate it. Without you, we couldn't have made this video. But this one doesn't have the new EMTB Plus support level. That's also part of the whole upgrade, but I will have the opportunity to ride this just one day in advance of the embargo lift. So future me is gonna tell you how this feels and how this bike rode, and also gonna draw the conclusion. So future Mike, you're up. Thanks past me and welcome to the future. I'm here to tell you my impressions from the trail about the new performance upgrade for the Bosch Performance Line CX Gen 5 motor. So like I said before, I've been riding this upgrade in another bike, in the M1 bike, for quite some time, about a week or 10 days, to get a feel for the plus in power, but I wanted to wait with this video because of the new EMTB Plus mode. And I'm glad that I did that because, in my opinion, the EMTB Plus support level or assistance mode is as big of an upgrade to the system as the performance numbers. So before we dive into that and all of that, the EMTB Plus mode is gonna be available from July, like the performance upgrade, for all CX Gen 5 motors, for the old CX Gen 4 motor, and also for the old CX Gen 4 race motor, which is a nice move from Bosch. I didn't expect that because the EMTB Plus mode is a little bit like a race light mode, but we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, impressions. How does the performance upgrade, how does the plus in power actually feel? And this is a really nice example that dyno testing, as helpful as it is in a lot of cases, and we will continue to do that, it never tells the whole story. Because, for example, the CX Gen 5 with this like performance mode maxed out now with 100 Newton meters and 750 watts of power feels completely different from the Specialized 3.1 S-Works motor that has very similar numbers and also performed quite similar in our graphs, right? Yeah, but it feels completely different. Bosch is still Bosch, and you have a lot more punch and acceleration when you really crank the pedals, especially in the higher support levels. And it reminded me a lot more of the DJI Avinox, especially before the software upgrade in last December, where they upped the support level a lot, like the assistance level. The CX Gen 5 feels a lot like the original software for the DJI Avinox. You have a lot of punch, a lot of acceleration. It's really easy to lift your front wheel up if you give it a good pedal, and it's not as smooth and not as natural as the Specialized, but I think a lot of people will like that it doesn't, that it feels like it does. And it makes a big difference in like tricky technical trail situations, especially if you're maybe struggling, if you don't have the power in your legs to, give it all. But I still stand by what I've said in our original review from the CX Gen 5 motor. I still think in like 9 out of 10 cases, 340% of support, 85 Newton meters and 600 watts is plenty, is enough. You don't need more. But there are some situations where this kind of power is welcome. And I think Bosch took a good approach to leaving it up to the rider if they want to use this plus in power. For me personally, it doesn't make a difference in my kind of riding, because when I don't get up a technical trail, it doesn't come down to a lack of power. It comes down to my lack of skills, and you can't make up for that with power. But for those of you who have the skill and who need that kind of power, I'm sure it's a welcome upgrade. But something that helped me a lot, and something that will help any rider on any e-mountain bike in the future with the Bosch system, is the EMTB Plus mode. Because, like I said, it bridges the gap between the race mode that is still exclusive for the CXR and the EMTB mode that all of you know from your Bosch bikes. It's still a dynamic mode, but it has a lot more support. It ramps up a lot more in the middle, like from 100 watts of input power from the rider, roughly. So you have the modulation when you just start pedaling. It feels natural, it feels good, something that you know from the EMTB mode. But as soon as you crank the pedals more, it starts to become a little bit more like the race mode. You get up to 400% of support, and you get up to 100 Newton meters and 750 watts of power. And this is, in my opinion, the bigger game changer in my kind of riding, because this is something that actually helps me, because I have a lot of modulation on the one hand, and on the other hand, I have the power when I need it, when my legs aren't strong enough. And this is really the bigger game changer. And something that's also new for the EMTB Plus mode is the dynamic control. It's something that Bosch has teased in the past with the launch of the CX Gen 5, but now we have a real traction control on the rear wheel. So it really detects when you have rear wheel slip, and it throttles down the power so you gain the grip back and you can go on pedaling. And all of that combined, you can really feel it. We did a some loops here with different support levels like turbo with less dynamic, and EMTB Plus and regular EMTB to really feel the difference. And I think a lot of the guys here, and me included, will prefer to ride in EMTB Plus in the future. Also because you get the extended boost there that you know from the EMTB mode, but you get it up to the 2 meters that have been exclusive to the race mode in the past. The main difference is that in race mode, the extended boost will always or almost always go on for 2 meters, which is the legal limit when you stop pedaling, which can, by the way, get you in some really hairy situations. But in the EMTB Plus mode, you get up to 2 meters, but you control how far the extended boost will push you on by the amount of power you give it when you crank the pedals, when you go for extended boost. So it's a real, it's not natural, but it's intuitive. Like, it's nice to have the power to control the amount of dynamic boost. For example, if you want to go up a big step, a big rock step, you see it coming up, you can give your pedals a good kick and it will push you up. But if you just, have to if you can't pedal, like if your cranks can't pedal and you just do a little bit of pressure on the pedals, it will help you, but it won't push you 2 meters like the race mode. So yeah, all in all, a really well-rounded software upgrade for the CX Gen 5 and also for the CXR, which will come with all those features, obviously, from July. Is it a real game changer? Does it turn the CX Gen 5 into a whole different beast? I don't think so. But the thing is, it doesn't need to be, because the CX Gen 5 was already a really good motor, and it just gives riders now the freedom to get quite a bit more power if they need it, if they want to use it and are aware of the trade-offs there are, which is, I think, welcome by a lot of you, by me as well. Obviously, it adds to the conversation when it comes to regulation, to power limits. This video is not the place to talk about that. You can feel free to leave your opinion about that and also the performance upgrade down below in the comments. And if you're down there, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. And thanks for watching. We'll see you guys soon. Bye bye.